Welcome to the New Life in Australia podcast, hosted by me, Karen Bleakley, founder of smartstepstoaustralia.com. Moving to Australia with my family was a life-changing experience, but it wasn't without its challenges. That's why I'm passionate about making the relocation and resettlement process easier for you, so you can enjoy this exciting adventure. Join me and my special guests as we share professional secrets and tips, learn from people who've made the move, and discover businesses that can help you realise your dreams. Now is the best time to create the life you've always wanted. This podcast is here to show you what's possible and to inspire you every step of the way. Let's go. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the Gubbi Gubbi people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I live, work and play. I thank them for the privilege of being able to live in such an incredible part of the world, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hey there, and welcome to episode 7 of the New Life in Australia podcast. Today I'm chatting again to my good friend Tracy Collins, who you might remember I interviewed in episode 3 of the podcast, all about her move to Mackay in Queensland and her relocation down to Brisbane. Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about her experience as a house sitter. Now, Tracy and her husband Doug have been really lucky to find some incredible house sitting opportunities, both in Australia and beyond. And we talk all about them, about their arrival experience and about all of the different travel opportunities they've been able to have while house sitting. So I think it's going to be a really good one. It's something that I never considered before I actually met Tracy, and she told me all about her experience house sitting. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing her story. Hey Tracy, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about who you are, where you're from and where you're now living.
Sure, Karen. Thanks very much for that intro. So yes, my name's Tracy Collins. I live in Brisbane. I'm originally from the UK, though I have lived all over the world, so we'll just say that. But I am British and now Australian because I have Australian citizenship. Yeah, so I live in Brisbane in my 50s now, and moved to Australia about 6.5 years ago.
Okay, and so today we're talking a bit about your house sitting experience. Can you tell us a bit about how you started house sitting, and just give us just a brief few lines, just tell us about what your house sitting experience is.
Okay, yeah, started house sitting about 7 years ago, I think. I'd heard about it from lots of people who love travel, and I like to travel and obviously try to save a bit of money when we travel, and house sitting is a really good way to do that. So I figured when we were about to move to Australia that I would have a look and see if there were house sits in Australia. But previous to that, we hadn't done any house sits at all. I'd kind of joined Trusted House Sitters and kind of was interested in how it worked. And then actually in the last few months before we left the UK to move to Australia, we'd sold our house and moved into a rental prior to moving over. But we had obviously getting out of the rental, timing's quite vital. And I actually found a house sit that lined up with the last 3 weeks we were in the UK. So we did that. So that was actually our first house sit, which worked perfectly.
So when it came to, obviously you were in a house sit in the UK, you booked your flight, had you to Australia, you knew when you were moving here. How easy was it to coordinate one for when you arrived in Australia? How did that all fit together?
It actually all fell into place. It was crazy. It all aligned. I found the house sit beside where we lived in the UK and applied, and we got that house sit for the 3 weeks before we actually flew out of the UK. And then we travelled for about 3 or 4 weeks before we arrived in Australia. And I had been looking on Trusted House Sitters once I knew where we were going to be relocating to in Australia. And I just thought, out of interest, I'll have a look, because obviously you've got to think about when you arrive, where you're going to stay. So I just happened to have a look on the house sitting site, and there was a house sit in the exact place that we were moving to and the exact week we were moving to that destination. And it was for 3.5 months. It was like a gift.
Oh my goodness. So all the stars aligned. It was just pure luck, really. But you made your own luck by being on the lookout for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. If I hadn't known about looking on house sitting, I would not have even known that that was a possibility. And I would have come over and I would have paid, expensive to stay in a hotel for the first few weeks, or a relocation agent to try and find me some accommodation. But actually, I didn't. We literally spent, I think, 4 days in the hotel in Mackay before actually Emma, who we house set for, she was going off for 3.5 months to finish some education she was doing. So we met up with her, we met the dogs, we had a chat about what the expectations were and everything. And that was it. After that, we literally moved in to the house. and we had a car.
Wow. Wow. And 3.5 months, that's a huge amount of time to take such a big pressure off your shoulders when you first arrive as well. So you mentioned you had dogs to look after as well. Obviously, house sitting is, we should say, is usually around people who've got pets that need someone to come to stay in their home, whether it's a cat they want feeding or dogs that they want looking after. So there is usually some pets involved in the process as well. So you actually moved into a home. You had how many dogs? Was it 2 dogs, did you say?
Two dogs to look after. So we had to obviously, looking after the dogs. So it's a few walks a day, looking after the dogs, keeping them occupied, looking after them health wise. But it really, honestly, pays off because we had this beautiful 4-bedroomed beach house with a pool, a car, just to look after these 2 gorgeous dogs for 3.5 months. So obviously, no bills. We had no bills to pay.
Yeah, so you had bill free, you had access to a car, you had a home for 3.5 months. That is pretty amazing. And you didn't have to pay anything for any of that. That was all included just in return for looking after 2 dogs.
Absolutely. So you just pay your annual fee to the house sitting agency. So once you paid that, there was no other fees, and we didn't have to pay any bills or anything like that. So basically, for 3.5 months, apart from putting petrol in the car and paying for our phone access, that there was nothing else. We didn't pay anything else out, obviously food, but nothing extra. So it was an enormous help because obviously, it costs quite a bit to move to Australia. So it was a really good start for us for those first 3.5 months not to have to pay anything
Oh,
out.
yes, for sure. And how did getting a house sit like that help you get settled? How was it useful for you just in the process of moving here and not knowing anybody and just not having anything? How was it to just move into a place that was all set up for you?
I think it removes that stress of having to find somewhere. I mean, past finding the hotel accommodation for the first few days, we didn't really have to think of anything past that. So it meant that we were a little bit more chilled about starting work because we knew we literally knew we had 3.5 months to actually find somewhere in that where we'd move to before we had to vacate the house sit. So that gave plenty of time to actually start looking around and also we actually decided not to stay in that particular town in Queensland. We moved down to Brisbane, but it gave us those 3 months where it actually took the pressure off, because if we had decided to stay there, it would have been much easier to figure out which area we wanted to stay in. And that sort of, obviously we don't have kids, well we do, but they're grown up. So, but if you've got the pressure of kids as well, thinking about which schools you want them to go to, I guess it takes a bit of that pressure off. And obviously the financial pressure is massive that it takes off because you don't have any bills to pay.
I can't imagine. It must have saved you so much money over that 3 months, because I know that we spent thousands on our first month's arrival accommodation, and then we had to really rush to buy cars really quickly and to rush and find a home and rush to find a school. And it was a real time pressure when you first get here, was we've got to sort all this stuff out really, really quickly. So to know that that's just, you can chill for a few weeks and just let things settle and find your way around and kind of find your feet and everything must have been a real relief.
Oh, it was. And I reckon we saved a good $26,000 in those few months.
Which is massive, because you can then put that towards buying your new home or whatever it is you want to do. So that's huge. So can we just talk a little bit about your profile on the house sitting website? So that's kind of like your resume, isn't it? Where house sitters, you can apply, and house sitters can, the clients can have a look at your profile and see if you're the right person to look after their pet. So how do you create a winning profile that makes you stand out from the crowd?
Well, I just put a photo of me and Doug on it and just said what we do or what we did for jobs as well. So I guess, and also our age, I think, helps because we're in our 50s. And the fact that did have references, because we actually had house sat for a friend on Vancouver Island back 2016, 2015. So she'd written us a reference, and then other people who would looked after their dogs or pets when they'd gone on holiday had kind of written us a reference to start us off. And obviously then we got the reference for the first house sit that we did in the UK. But I think it's really important that if you have got experience with animals, that you put that on there, because I've always had dogs. My entire life we've always had dogs, and we also had cats. So I'm used to dogs and cats. So we're very happy to look after dogs and cats. So just be really clear about, and put photos on of your pets, and that, which is what we did. Obviously, unfortunately, we've lost all our pets now. I have to just say, this is one other advantage of house sitting, is that because I'd love to get a dog, but we travel too much, is that you get to spoil other people's dogs and enjoy that time with the dog without having to keep it, forever, which is lovely.
You get
So
the
you don't have the
cuddles and then you get to give it
responsibility.
back again.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like grandchildren. It's that sort of thing.
Oh, do you think that there are opportunities for families to be able to house sit? 'Cause I know that's something that's always stopped me from bothering to look into it, was that when we moved here, especially, we obviously had really little kids. Now they're a little bit older. Do you think there are opportunities for families, or do you think it is easier if you're just a couple or a solo person doing it?
I don't know, but I know that the first house that we did, they had people with families house sitting there before. So I don't think that it would have been any issue if we'd been traveling over with kids either. Obviously, where you would struggle is if you have your own pet, and I know some people will take their own pet with them, but that can be an issue, I think. But to be honest, every house sit is different, so I think you just have to have a look and see what the criteria is. And if you put there in your profile, that we've got 3 kids, or we're traveling with our dog, or usually a dog, then people can make a decision. If they've got a friendly dog that doesn't mind other dogs coming at their home, then they might not mind. So it's that sort of thing. I think everything is about that communication, because you have to apply for a house sit anyway. You don't just get it. You have to apply and say why you'd like to do it, and then the person at the other end who's kind of looking for the house sitter will get the chance to vet, and they will have a chat with you. So we had a couple of Zoom chats with Emma before she made a decision, because obviously she had a few people to choose between. So you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get the house sit that you want. I mean, we've been pretty good, and to be honest, I now get approached through the trusted house sitters for house sits in the area, because occasionally I will do them, and people say, "Oh, are you available?" and we'll do it that way. But I don't think discount anything, and also don't discount, actually, sometimes there also are house sits where there aren't any pets, that people just want somebody to look after the house for the period of time they're away. But again, you just have to have a look and see what will match you.
I didn't realise people put their houses on just to look after their houses. So you don't always have that pet, because obviously if you've got a pet to look after, a dog, then you can only go out for such a sort of time period. You've got kind of to come back to walk the dog. Whereas if it's just a house sit for the house, then you've got a bit more freedom to kind of go out for a long day out. So with us living in Australia, and we're originally from the UK, and when we go back to travel there, we are usually back for quite a few weeks in a block. And I know that it can be really tricky to find accommodation, and also living with relatives and things for like 4 or 5 or 6 weeks when you go back can be really tricky too, especially when there's a few of you traveling. Have you done any house sits for sort of long periods when you've gone back to travel to the UK again?
We haven't, but it's not something that we don't discount doing in the future, mainly because we do a lot of traveling around the UK when we go back. So tend to stay with family, but also for our own business. So we do a lot of traveling that way, but it's not saying that we don't do house sits and other destinations around the world, though. But we haven't in the UK at the moment. Maybe if we went back for 6 months, I probably wouldn't want to lumber all our relatives with us for that length of time. And there certainly are plenty of house sits in the UK for sure.
That's great. And like you say, all around the world as well. It's not just limited to certain countries. So whether you're from the US, Canada, or wherever you are, there's going to be house sitting opportunities if you go back for a long visit. So you were saying you do some local house sitting now, and I know you still go on holidays and house sit, and I know you've got a holiday coming up to do a house sit, haven't you?
Yes. I leave on Sunday actually for New Zealand. So we've got a week in New Zealand, traveling around North Island, and then I'm actually flying down so that's to do some work for one of our websites. But after that, I'm flying down to Christchurch for 2 weeks to house sit and look after a lovely, lovely little dog called Henry. So I'll be house sitting there, which is going to be fantastic. It's going to give me a couple of weeks break to just get on and do some work, and then my husband's flying over for the last 9 days, and we'll do some travels around South Island again for one of our websites. So it's a great way of doing that. I wouldn't have been able to do that when we initially planned the trip to New Zealand. I was very much wanting to go to South Island too, and I couldn't figure out a way that I could do that And I just happened to look, we were both going to fly back to Brisbane on the 25th of August. And I actually looked at it, and I realised that there was a house sit in Christchurch on the 25th of August. So I just applied, and they were like, yeah, absolutely, come and stay with us for 2.5. So yeah, and then my daughter's also coming over for a week of that as well. I asked them, is it okay if my daughter comes to visit? Obviously you've got to ask, and they were absolutely delighted, and they said absolutely no problem. So
I love it that you can
it's a
use
great
it.
way to save money
Yeah, I
and
was
see
going
the
to
world.
say, what a great way to travel. And I know that New Zealand was high on your bucket list of places you haven't been to before. So house sitting's enabling you to stay for a couple of weeks on the South Island, which is going to be beautiful. You're going to love it.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So
I can't
your
wait.
plans are to carry on doing this, carry on house sitting here and there, just kind of using the opportunities as they show up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we're traveling for about 5 months coming up soon, and even that I've started looking in the different countries to see if there's house sitting available. Definitely a lot of house sits in North America, in Australia, in Europe. It's a little bit more tricky in Asia where I've been looking, but it's definitely worth looking at. If you can, especially for me, because as I can work anywhere, I'm kind of digital, online work, that I can go anywhere to work. So if there's a house sit for 3 months somewhere, there's no reason why I can't go off and sit and do that house sit, enjoy that area. So, and also do some work while I'm there. So it kind of marries up both things. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's perfect. What tips do you have for anyone who is moving to Australia and they're considering doing what you did and looking for a house sit for their arrival?
I think that it would be a good idea to join one of the house sitting groups. So I'm part of Trusted House Sitters. There are a few, and there are some like specifically focused on countries. So there are for Australia. So it might be worth having a look at which ones you want to join. Looking at your profile, getting your profile sorted, maybe even doing a house sit in the UK before, so you've got that kind of reference, and then just having a look to see what's available. There's also a Facebook group on house sitting that's worth joining and having a look on there and asking advice. But certainly Australians do like house sitters coming around and looking after the house. It's very normal here. It's not something exceptional. And honestly, you may look out like we did. It was incredible. I can't, I look back on it now and think everything lined up for us so well. I was thinking now, 3.5 months, we saved such a lot of money. We settled into the area much easier because we didn't have the stress of looking for a house or thinking about all that stuff. At least for the first few weeks, we could just get used to it, figure out where the supermarket was and where the shops were and where the doctor was and all that stuff, without also having to think, oh, we have to go and buy furniture or we have to pay an exorbitant amount for a hotel every night. So yeah, it's really worth doing. It's really worth looking at to see if you can, have the opportunity like we did. It's a great way to travel, but also a fantastic way if you can get it when you're coming out to Australia to help you to settle in.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything that you wish you'd known before you started house sitting?
No, I think I really enjoy it. So I think no, probably just that how good it is. And just that it is a genuinely great. You just have to like animals. I will say this really, if you are doing it, as I say, there are some that come up that don't have expectation to look after animals, but majority do have animals. So I think, yeah, you're not going, if you want to go out and do weekends away, you can't. So for us, when we were in Macau, we were lucky in that Emma came back a couple of times from her course and she spent the weekend. So we could go up to the Whitsundays and things like that. We could have weekends away, but we would not have been able to do that for that 3.5 months if she hadn't come back. So you have to think you are committing that you, apart from a date, maybe a few hours out in the day, that the expectation is that you are there looking after the animals and that you're there for the house. So I think that's something you've got to consider. It's not a holiday. You are actually there you've got to keep the house clean and tidy. You've got to make sure the animals are kept looked after like you would look after your own. So it is still responsibility.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. Well, thanks for telling us all about it today. It's definitely something that I didn't even consider when we moved to Australia, and I really wish we'd kind of thought about it, although when we moved we had 3 very little kids, and I think it would have been quite hard work being in somebody else's house with very little kids. But I think now my kids are a bit older,
Yeah.
it's definitely something that I'm keen to have a bit of a look into, especially as we've got a little dog as well now. Now our kids are kind of used to being around animals all the time. So it's definitely something we will have to look into. But thanks a lot for sharing your experience of house sitting with us.
Oh no, absolute pleasure. Thanks, Karen, for having me on the show.
So I hope you enjoyed that episode 7. You'll find the show notes over on smartstepstoaustralia.com/episode 7, and that will have all of the links in there, including an article on my website where I've chatted to Tracy more about her experience of house sitting, and there's also a link as well to the house sitting company that she uses. Thanks for listening, and I hope you found it really useful. If you've been inspired after listening to this episode to give house sitting a try, I can't wait to hear about it. Please drop me a DM either in Instagram or on Facebook, or tag me in a post or something just to tell me what your plans are and tell me what you're getting up to, because I think it sounds like a really great way to travel the world. So thanks, Tracy, for such a great, inspiring talk. Tune in again as we build your new life in Australia, one episode at a time.